I'm Tim Ventura from AmericanAntiGravity.com, and I'm speaking today with Dr. Paul Laviolette, physicist and author of numerous papers and books about the Biefeld-Brown Effect, anti-gravity, and a variety of other compelling scientific topics. Well, to start right out, Paul, your research into electrogravitic systems has provided some real insight into the technical aspects of the Biefeld-Brown effect and many electrogravitic technologies. Can you tell us a bit about your educational background and some of the life experiences that led you into this field of study?
Well, let's see, educational background. I got my physics degree at Johns Hopkins, and then my PhD is in systems science. There I was developing a new approach to physics. Um, my work in electrogravitics, I guess I became aware of it in the mid-'80s. I guess the first indication was an article in UFO magazine written by a fellow talking about Townsend Brown's work. Before that time, I had an interest generally in UFOs and how they might work. Just found the whole field fascinating. But I had been developing this alternative physics since '73. And when I first read this paper on electrogravitics, I was very excited because it seemed to confirm something in my theory, which I was thinking that maybe my theory was wrong because it was predicting something that was against the standard views in physics, namely this physics theory I was working on was, which is called subquantum kinetics, predicted that there's a coupling between electric charge and gravity. So, for example, a proton would have a negative, it would be like a positive mass, so it would create a gravity well, whereas electron would be the opposite, it would create a gravity hill. And nothing like that is predicted in standard physics. General relativity doesn't allow for anti-gravity, for it's always warping space into gravity wells. With subquantum kinetics, you don't warp space. It's an entirely different approach. It basically replaces general relativity. In fact, it predicts a lot of the effects that general relativity just takes as assumptions. For example, time dilation, gravitational time dilation, how the gravitational force is actually created, because general relativity never explains that as far as how does a mass affect the metric of space. It just takes it as an assumption.
Well, to take a step back really quick, in terms of definitions, a lot of people use the terms electrogravity and anti-gravity interchangeably, but I'm wondering how you define them, and is there a difference in what they mean?
I tend to use electrogravity or electrogravitics more where you have a connection between charge and gravity, but there's other kinds of approaches that generate anti-gravity effects, which, for example, use magnets. Example being the Searle disk, or what Doctors Roshan and Godin have duplicated with their device, which I guess they call it the magnetic energy converter. The common thing is in all these technologies, they're better understood if you accept the concept of an ether. That's why I think the standard physics is pretty much out at sea in explaining these things because they don't admit the existence of an ether. Of course, they've started to come back to talk about zero-point energy continuum and this sort of thing, but that's not really an ether.
Sure, sure, and it does seem like, it does seem like a lot of the newer terms, even the fabric of time and space, which is one that I use. In a lot of ways, it seems like science uses these as kind of a thinly veiled cover for this concept of an ether.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in touch with a group of physicists and who are also, among other things, interested in anti-gravity and trying to explain these things with physics. And they try within their own universe of concepts concepts, which basically is based on general relativity or string theory or whatever, and it becomes very cumbersome. Some of these ideas, they're very mathematical, and they talk about introducing ad hoc higher dimensions. I suppose you can create any theory you want by introducing higher dimensions. Subquantum kinetics already has that concept built into it of a higher dimension. But the thing is, it's based on, it's not something that's just invented out of the blue. It's based on systems concepts, which are fairly well established. We see operating in all sorts of systems, which we've studied.
Yeah, my understanding of higher dimensions, at least in terms of string theory, was that they came from a purely mathematical format. They originally didn't have any kind of tie-in to existing physics, except that the lower part of the theory connected back and explained some of the concepts. So having a theory with built-in explanations definitely seems helpful.
What I've heard about string theory is that it has not yet made a single prediction that has been verified. This is what I read. I don't know if it has maybe made one so far, but this is what I've heard. It hasn't made any. Subquantum kinetics, on the other hand, has so far, since it was conceived, made 10 predictions that have been verified. Those are a priori, and a lot of those were pre-published. And I think it takes the record of making the most predictions of any theory. I think it surpasses general relativity, for example.
Sure. Well, your list of published books includes Earth Under Fire, Beyond the Big Bang, Subquantum Kinetics, and then you edited A Systems View of Man. Now, for people with an interest in anti-gravity and electrogravity, I guess Subquantum Kinetics would definitely be kind of a must-read. But do the other two have a connection back to this? The Earth Under Fire, Beyond the Big Bang, or perhaps even The Systems View of Man?
You don't really need to read the other books, like Beyond the Big Bang, Earth Under Fire. They are more of a different approach. Dealing with, for example, ancient myths and legends, is showing that there's advanced science encoded in ancient myths. Subquantum kinetics is presenting the physics theory, this new physics theory, and its implications for cosmology and astronomy, and also has a chapter on electrogravitics. Also, one of the chapters deals with Tesla-type waves, and for example, discusses the Podkleinoff experiment, where he's created a force field beam. Actually, though, that type of result is predicted as one of the other predictions that come out of subquantum kinetics.
You know, and that's amazing because I don't think Podkleinoff himself has really come up with a good scientific theory to explain why the beam works. He just has the experimental result. And again, he's claiming a beam, hundreds of pounds of force that smashes brick and warps metal, quote-unquote, like hitting it with a sledgehammer. So being able to provide an explanation for that is a real breakthrough.
Yeah, well, I have over the years been in touch with Eugene Podkleinoff, and he's kind of adopted subquantum kinetics as the theory that would explain what he's doing. In fact, he wrote a very nice review of subquantum kinetics. It was published in Infinite Energy magazine. But in publishing papers about his effect, he's teamed up with a physicist named Modenese, who has offered different theories, which attempt to use things like Casimir force and other things like that, which are in conventional physics. But always here it's after the fact. I mean, you can come up with any theory to try to explain something afterwards, but it's very difficult. Very rarely you find theories saying something ahead of time and then experiment confirms.
Sure. Well, in terms of the books, do you have any recommendations for where people could buy a copy if they wanted to, just buy a copy of Subquantum Kinetics and start reading up on it and learning about these concepts? Where could they pick one up?
Okay, it's available through a website called etheric.com, ETHERIC.com.
Okay, so etheric.com would be the place to go. Well,
yeah, it's not something you could get at a bookstore except through special ordering it. So that's another approach, a special order from a bookstore.
There's also...
It is technical. technical. I warn you, it's got equations in it. It's not as technical as a lot of physics books. It's very conceptual at the same time.
Oh, okay. Okay, so literally has something for everybody then.
Yeah, but let's put it this way, it's more for a serious reader because it's imagine a battle being fought, and the opposition is the conventional views in physics. You have to really dot every I on what you're saying. I mean, it's very carefully written. It's not like something that's just like stuff written to be pleasant to read, you know.
Yeah, well, and every year people spend millions and millions of dollars buying books on physics. And in those books, they literally just explain things that are already known using the old theories of yesterday. So this might be an investment that people could make in a new theory that gives new predictions for the future.
Yeah, in fact, the most recent prediction that has been verified is the Pioneer Effect. Are you familiar with this?
Now, isn't that a slowing down of the probe as it leaves the solar system?
Well, that's the way they interpret it. You see, the actual data shows that there's a blue shifting of the maser frequency. In other words, to track a Pioneer spacecraft, we send, or now we've lost touch with it, but during that time, up until 1998, 99 or so, we were sending a maser signal out to the Pioneer craft, and it would transpond back to us. And we look at the frequency coming back to get a handle on how fast is the craft moving, so we know where it is in its orbit. It's called Doppler Tracking. And what they found is the beam that came back was blue shifted more. The beam is red shifted because the craft is moving away. So if something moves away, it's red shifted. But it was red shifted less than they'd expect. In other words, that there was a superimposed blue shifting in there that they couldn't explain. So the way they tried to explain it is that there's this force pushing the craft in towards the solar system, kind of slowing it down, like you said. But the other interpretation is that there's no force pushing this, that it's due to the photon beam itself spontaneously blue shifting. And this was the experiment that was predicted by subquantum kinetics over a decade earlier, before the effect was discovered. In 1980, in fact, I called JPL, which is the same group that's working on the Pioneer Effect, and I told them about the predictions of subquantum kinetics, that it predicts a very small blue shifting effect. It's so small you can't observe it on Earth. The only way would be to transpond signals between spacecraft. In fact, I asked them, have you seen anything like this in your data? And they said no. And as it turns out, that same year, they claimed that starting in 1980, which was the year I called them, they started noticing that there was a blue shifting effect. And they kind of tracked this over the years, and finally in the mid-90s wrote up this study, and they found it was real. Now, I had back then in 1980 predicted the exact amount that they should find. And it turns out what they found was within 2 standard deviations of my prediction. So that's pretty much, I consider that confirmation.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're shooting an arrow into the air, you have no idea, and to be 2 standard deviations off, that's pretty good.
Sure. Well, now, you've also published another paper, or I should say Tom Vallone...
Before we go on, I should, because maybe you don't know the implications of this. This is fairly earth-shaking stuff, because what it's suggesting is a violation of the energy conservation law.
Oh, okay. And that now, would that connect back to gravity directly, or is that another part of the theory that predicts the anti-gravity effect?
That would probably be more important in astronomy, in terms of, you'd have to completely redo astronomy. It solves a lot of problems in astronomy. Also, it sort of takes away the taboo on things like free energy, because the physicists will always cite the first law of thermodynamics. And here we're saying, well, the first law of thermodynamics is routinely violated by nature. So it helps in that area. but I'm just showing this as an example of a prediction.
Sure. Well,
Recently
now,
published.
to move on to the next paper, this was important to me because it was actually what led me to your website, the etheric.com website. Tom Vallone published a paper of yours called The U.S. Anti-Gravity Squadron in his book Electrogravitic Systems. I have a partial reprint of this online on the American Anti-Gravity website, and one of the claims that you make is that the B-2 bomber may be using the Biefeld-Brown effect. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah. Well, at the time I had this idea, I had for many years been studying Brown's work, and he had been flying disks around a kind of a maypole apparatus. You probably have some of this information on your website, right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
The Brown's flying disc experiments, and then in the 50s, in fact, he demonstrated some of his larger discs to the military, some top brass, and it's said that they classified the results, so you don't know. You didn't know exactly how it performed, except somebody did say that they were going hundreds of miles per hour. So you figure that there were some astounding results, and then you didn't hear anything more about it. After that, there was not another experiment publicly done on this, which is a little strange. And then in the 90s, what was it? Aviation and Space Technologies, one of those journals, published a story of some scientists that had worked in black projects who sort of spilled the beans about some of the technology on the B-2. And they were saying that the B-2 charges its leading edge to a very high voltage, the leading edge of its wing, and also uses its engines. It puts ions of opposite charge in its exhaust stream. So they didn't say too much. That was about all they said. But just from that, I concluded that this was a version of Townsend Brown's Project Winter Haven concept.
Well, you know, one of the interesting things about that, I saw a page on Jean-Louis Naudin's JLN Labs website, and he conducted an experiment on boundary layer physics based on the Northrop research from the 1960s. And that's research that Boeing probably would have had access to while they were designing the B-2. But the idea behind it was...
Could I correct you there?
Sure.
Northrop was the one that designed the airframe of the B-2, not Boeing.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
We're not talking... Boeing worked on the small fighter. There were two stealth. My paper is not about the small stealth fighter. It's about the bomber, the large one, the V-shaped. And Northrop was the one that had the contract for the airframe, and the engine part was GE.
Oh, okay. Well, in terms of the boundary layer physics, Naudin used an oil bath, and he actually put a wing sideways in the oil bath and rotated it, and he demonstrated that the boundary layer, you know, the air pressure in front of the wing that slows it down and creates drag and all that kind of stuff, that actually almost completely disappeared in his experiment. It was really profound. The photos really say it all. So I definitely think that that's something that they could have at least gotten more fuel economy out of.
Oh yes, definitely.
Well, another
claim they don't use it on conventional aircraft.
You know, another claim that you've made is that the high voltage gas plasma from the Biefeld-Brown effect may be a stealth technology also that may help make the B-2 radar invisible. Can you tell me a bit more about this?
Well, if you create a plasma around a craft, the plasma will either absorb microwaves or deflect them, bend the trajectories. So that means a radar, which is microwave signal, is not going to have a return echo. It will appear that there's nothing there. You see, so the only way a radar would know is if it bounced back. But with the plasma, you prevent the bounce back.
Well, now, one of the things that I've wondered about is, in addition to the bounce back from the aircraft itself, modern radar systems, like Doppler radar, can detect weather patterns. And if you have something the size of an aircraft pushing a substantial amount of air in front of it, which they all do, even if the aircraft itself was invisible, wouldn't something like the Biefeld-Brown effect be required to get rid of that boundary layer, which itself would be
Oh,
visible?
yeah. Yeah, well, the B-2 is not completely invisible. There have been articles about that, complaints, you know. Um, in a way, I mean, it is more stealthy than other aircrafts, but the idea that it's completely invisible, I don't think is true. I think that was played up in the media. You see, the whole thing, there was this major cover as to what was the key innovation there, and the stealthiness was maybe a small part of it. You know, the real thing was its propulsion system.
Sure, sure.
For example, there have been reports that when the B-2 is flying over, you get all sorts of static, which it would happen if they had turned on their electrogravitic drive. You're putting a lot of ions, a turbulent plasma of ions, out the back end, and that's going to generate radio signals.
Well, do you think that this is a direct propulsive effect, or is it just a reduction in boundary layer drag?
Well, there's also the propulsive effect. Brown was getting a propulsive effect. That's what was making his saucers go around. He didn't have any jets propelling them to move forward. They were moving forward by this electrogravitic effect.
Yeah, the reason that I ask is, with my own experiments with lifters, I haven't been able, and again, I'm working on a tremendously small scale compared to an aircraft-sized device, but I just haven't been able to get that kind of thrust, and so I'd wondered if it was more of just reducing, making the engines more efficient, or if there's actually direct propulsion. But it sounds like there's direct propulsion going on. Well,
if you in the paper on the B2, actually it's in my subquantum kinetics book. I plot the thrust, or the speed of his disks versus voltage, and you find it goes up as an exponential. It's like over the fifth power. So it's very nonlinear. And he was operating initially only at 50 to 150,000 volts. The plot I have is up to 50,000 volts.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense because I've seen definite nonlinear effects. So
you go like in the B2, you're up to 15 million volts, and so with a fifth power, you get tremendous forces. You see.
Absolutely. Well, and even from 1 foot up to a 4 foot difference, there's a tremendous difference not only in thrust but also in the way they handle, just the way they hang in the air. I mean, just everything about them is different. And realistically, the 4 foot one isn't that much larger than the 1 foot. So, well, in essence, I guess the U.S. Anti-Gravity Squadron is really suggesting that by utilizing the Biefeld-Brown effect, the B-2 would have higher performance, greater payloads, better fuel economy, and complete radar invisibility, or at least better invisibility.
Not just that. It's more than better fuel economy. At a certain point, you can actually turn off the gasoline supply and just coast purely on electrogravitic drive.
That's
the way that happens is this. It's a feedback that goes on. Okay, so imagine the craft. It's creating this sheath of ions in front of it. It's like an umbrella in front of it, okay, of positive ions. And
Sure.
the negative ions, it's blowing out the back through its engines, okay? So it's creating a gravity field that's pulling itself forward. But as it moves forward, it's scooping huge amounts of air into its engines. That's one of the one of the features of B2 is that it scoops a lot of air. You familiar with that?
Certainly.
The cover is that they're mixing the air to cool the exhaust so it's not seen by detection systems. But there's another reason, and that is those jets are flame jet generators. In other words, they put ions in them, and they work like Van de Graaff generators. See, by ionizing the exhaust stream, because the exhaust stream is moving, you can get electrical energy out of it. It's like a magnetohydrodynamic system in a way.
Yeah.
In this case, electrohydrodynamic. And you can use it like an electric generator, just like a Van de Graaff generator, and get millions of volts. And in fact, they have a electrical conductive plate at the exhaust, which picks up the power and recycles it to create the high voltage charge on the wing.
Well, and the exhaust also contains a fair number of ions on its own. I mean, I've been surprised. I've actually thought about putting plans up for a flame jet generator demonstration because they're on a small scale. They don't work as well, but they're pretty easy to build and demonstrate. And you can do remarkable things with even a candle flame.
It's not really rocket science. It's a matter of just getting a high voltage generator with a needle, and you stick the needle in the exhaust, and there you have a flame jet generator.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paul, we're out of time for today, but I should refer people back to the etheric.com website. And again, your excellent work with subquantum kinetics. Do you have any comments you'd like to leave the audience with?
Comments? Good luck with your research. I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for your time. And I look forward to learning more about subquantum kinetics. And again, people can buy a copy from etheric.com.